Greaves whispered, looking around. "The community board is furious. If they find out about the donation..." "They won't," Arthur snapped. He raised his hand, snapping his fingers loudly. "Waitress, more wine. Now." Casey Bennett hurried over. Casey was 26 with tired eyes and hair pulled back into a tight, fraying bun. Her uniform was clean, but hung loosely on her thin frame. She had been working a double shift. Her feet felt like they were bleeding inside her non-slip shoes. She reached for the bottle of Chateau Margaux on the table. As she poured, the heavy sleeve of her uniform grazed the edge of Arthur's cufflink, a diamond-encrusted platinum piece worth more than Casey's annual rent. Arthur recoiled, as if he'd been touched by a leper. He jerked his arm back, knocking the wine glass. A splash of red landed on the pristine white tablecloth. Not on him, just the cloth. But the reaction was nuclear. "You clumsy idiot!" Arthur roared. The entire restaurant went silent. Conversations stopped. The piano player in the corner froze. Casey went pale. "Sir, I am so sorry. I'll get a fresh cloth immediately." "I don't want a cloth." Arthur stood up, towering over her. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a money clip, and peeled off a crisp new $100 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and threw it. It hit Casey in the chest and fell to the floor. "Pick it up," Arthur commanded. Casey stared at him. The room was watching. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I said pick it up," Arthur sneered. "That's $100. That's probably 2 days of work for someone like you. Take it. Leave this table. Get out of my sight. Your face is depressing me. It's ruining my appetite." David Greaves, the councilman, looked down at his plate, ashamed but too cowardly to speak. Casey looked at the money on the floor. Then she looked at Arthur. Her face didn't crumble. She didn't cry. A strange cold calmness washed over her features. She bent down. She picked up the bill. She smoothed it out, slowly checking the serial number, then placed it in her apron pocket. "Thank you, sir," Casey said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly level. "I'll make sure you aren't disturbed again." She walked away. Arthur laughed, sitting back down. "See, David, everyone has a price, even the trash." He didn't notice that Casey hadn't gone to the kitchen. She had moved to the service station just behind the decorative pillar, less than 5 feet away. And she wasn't crying. She was listening. To understand why Arthur Penhaligon made a fatal error that night, you have to understand who Casey Bennett actually was. On her employment forms, Casey listed her education as high school graduate. She listed her previous employment as retail. She kept her head down, did her work, and collected her tips. But Casey Bennett was actually Casey Benedetto. 5 years ago, Casey was a forensic accounting prodigy at NYU Stern. She was top of her class, recruited by the FBI's white-collar crime division for a summer internship. She had a gift, a near-eidetic memory for numbers. She could look at a spreadsheet for 10 seconds and tell you where the money was missing. Her life fell apart when her father, a small-time contractor in Queens, committed suicide. He had been bankrupt by a developer who refused to pay for $2 million worth of concrete work on a luxury project. The legal fees to fight the developer drained the family's savings. Casey had to drop out of NYU to care for her mother, who developed early-onset dementia from the shock. The developer who refused to pay her father. It wasn't Arthur Penhaligon. It was a subsidiary company called Blue Horizon LLC, a shell company. Casey had spent the last 4 years trying to pierce the corporate veil, trying to find out who actually owned Blue Horizon, so she could sue them for the money they owed her family. She had hit dead end after dead end. Until tonight. Standing behind the pillar at the Gilded Crane, clutching the $100 bill, Casey heard the councilman whisper, "Arthur, if the press finds out you're the one behind Blue Horizon, if they link the bankruptcy of those contractors in Queens to the Penhaligon parent company, the waterfront deal is dead. You can't be associated with that." Casey's breath hitched. She froze, a pitcher of water in her hand. Blue Horizon, the name that had haunted her family. The ghost that had killed her father. It was him. It had been Arthur Penhaligon all along. He had hidden behind shell companies to stiff contractors, driving them to ruin to save himself a few percentage points on construction costs. Arthur's voice floated over the partition, arrogant and loud. "David, you worry too much. Blue Horizon is buried deep. My lawyers at Cravath have made sure the paper trail ends in the Cayman Islands. The only link that exists physically is the original deed transfer for the waterfront property, which lists Blue Horizon as the purchaser before we transferred it to Penhaligon West. And that deed is sitting in my private safe at the penthouse. No one sees it. No one knows." Arthur chuckled. "Besides, I need that waterfront zoning change by Friday. Once the vote passes, we bulldoze the old cannery and build the casino. That puts $50 million into your re-election campaign fund, heavily laundered, of course." Casey's mind was racing. She wasn't just hearing a confession. She was hearing a road map. 1. The crime bribery of a city official and fraud. 2. The evidence, a deed transfer hidden in his penthouse safe. 3. The deadline Friday. The vote was Friday. Today was Tuesday. She had 3 days. Arthur Penhaligon thought he had paid a waitress $100 to leave him alone. In reality, he had just funded the cab ride she would take to the greatest revenge plot New York had ever seen. Casey finished her shift. She served 3 other tables with a smile. She even refilled Arthur's water glass later, moving so quietly he didn't even look up from his cognac. When she clocked out at 11 p.m., she didn't go home to her small apartment in Astoria. She walked into a 24-hour internet cafe on 8th Avenue. She logged on to a secure terminal. She wasn't a hacker, but she was a researcher. She needed to verify one thing. She pulled up the public records for the city council schedule. The waterfront zoning vote was indeed scheduled for Friday at 2:00 p.m. Then she looked up the floor plans for the Penhaligon Plaza Arthur's residential building. It was a fortress. Doorman, keycard elevators, private security. Breaking in was impossible for a waitress. But Casey remembered something from her days as a waitress catering high-end private parties. Penhaligon Plaza didn't just have residents. It had services. Dog walkers, florists, cleaning crews. She went to a job listing site. Craigslist. Indeed. TaskRabbit. And there it was. A post from Elite Cleaners NY posted 3 hours ago. Urgent need. Fill in cleaner for high-end residential penthouse. NDA required. 6 a.m. Start tomorrow. Upper East Side. The agency catered to the ultra-rich. The regular cleaner must have called out sick. Casey looked at her bank account. She had $400 to her name. She needed a fake ID and a reference to get that job by morning. She looked at the crumpled $100 bill Arthur had thrown at her. "Thanks for the startup capital, Arthur," she whispered. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called since her days at NYU. A guy named Benny the Ink, a brilliant but unethical graphic design student who now ran a side hustle in the back of a bodega in Hell's Kitchen. "Benny," she said when he answered, "it's Casey. I need a favor, and I have exactly $100. Benny the Ink operated out of a damp basement beneath a bodega on 10th Avenue that smelled of cat litter and soldering iron. He held the crisp $100 bill up to the flickering fluorescent light. "Arthur Penhaligon gave you this?" Benny asked, raising an eyebrow. He was a skinny guy with ink-stained fingers and a nervous twitch. "He threw it at me, actually," Casey corrected, leaning against the doorframe. "Can you do it, Benny? I need a clean ID, Casey Miller. No criminal record, no college, just a hard-working cleaner from Ohio." Benny smirked. "For $100, usually this is $300. But since you were the smartest girl in our forensic accounting class, and because I hate guys like Penhaligon, I'll do it." 30 minutes later, Casey walked out with a New York State driver's license that was indistinguishable from the real thing. It was warm from the laminator. By 8 a.m. on Wednesday, Casey was standing in the glossy marble-floored lobby of the staffing agency Elite Cleaners NY. She had transformed herself. The messy bun was gone, replaced by a severe low ponytail. She wore thick, cheap reading glasses she'd bought at a pharmacy. She wore no makeup, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She looked invisible. She looked like help. The interview was short. The agency was desperate. The regular cleaner for the Penhaligon penthouse had quit. Suddenly, rumor had it Arthur had thrown a vase at her. "The client is difficult," the agency manager. A woman with a tight smile warned Casey. "He requires absolute silence. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact. You clean and you leave. Can you handle that, Miss Miller?" "I'm very quiet, ma'am," Casey said softly, staring at her shoes. "I just need the work." She got the job. 2 hours later, Casey was riding the service elevator up to the 91st floor of the Penhaligon Plaza. Her heart was beating so hard, she felt dizzy. She was carrying a bucket of eco-friendly cleaning supplies, but hidden inside a hollowed-out bottle of granite polish was her smartphone and a tiny USB drive. The elevator doors opened directly into the service vestibule of the penthouse. "You're the new girl." Casey froze. A large woman in a stiff black uniform was waiting for her. Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper. She looked like a woman who hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration. "Yes, ma'am. Casey Miller. Don't dawdle. Mr. Penhaligon is still here. He has a meeting in the library. You start in the master bedroom. Do not, and I repeat, do not go into the East Wing until he leaves. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Casey moved into the apartment. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked down on Central Park. The walls were lined with art that cost more than the GDP of a small country. As Casey was dusting the hallway, a door slammed open. Arthur Penhaligon stormed out, wearing a silk dressing gown and shouting into a phone. He walked straight toward Casey. Panic seized her. If he recognized her from the restaurant, if he saw the waitress he had humiliated less than 24 hours ago, it was over. She would be arrested for trespassing and fraud. She turned her back to him, scrubbing a spotless mirror with frantic intensity. Arthur walked right past her. He didn't even break his stride. To him, she was just a shape in a uniform. A non-person. "I don't care what the unions say. Arthur screamed into his phone. "Crush them if they strike, we fire them. I want that site cleared by Monday." He disappeared into the elevator. The doors chimed and closed. Casey let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since Tuesday night. He was gone. The East Wing was open, and somewhere in the East Wing was the safe. The East Wing of the penthouse was strictly business only. It contained a conference room, a small gym, and Arthur's private study. Mrs. Higgins was busy in the kitchen berating a delivery boy about the freshness of the kale. Casey knew she had maybe 20 minutes before the housekeeper did her rounds. Casey slipped into the study. It smelled of old paper mahogany and cigar smoke. It was dark, the curtains drawn. Casey didn't waste time looking for a wall safe behind a painting. That was Hollywood nonsense. Billionaires like Arthur didn't hide things behind paintings. They hid them in plain sight, integrated into the furniture. She scanned the room. An antique globe number A false book on the shelf. Too cliché. Her eyes landed on the desk. It was a massive, custom-built piece of French oak. The drawers were locked, but Casey wasn't looking for drawers. She was looking for asymmetry. She knelt, examining the heavy wooden legs of the desk. The right rear leg had a faint seam in the wood grain, barely visible unless you were looking for it or cleaning it. She pressed her thumb against a knot in the wood. Click. A panel on the side of the desk popped open. Inside, there was no keyhole. There was a digital keypad glowing with a soft blue light. Casey cursed silently. 4 digits, 10,000 combinations. She closed her eyes, thinking. Think like a narcissist. Think like Arthur. She tried his birthday. Error. She tried the building's address. Error. She had 3 tries left before the system would likely lock down or alert security. She thought back to the restaurant. What was Arthur obsessed with? Money, yes, but specifically winning. The waterfront deal. The Blue Horizon project. But there was something else, a number he had mentioned to the councilman. Not a date. A price. I need that zoning change. Puts 50 million into your campaign. No, that wasn't it. She remembered the wine. The Chateau Margaux. Arthur had made a huge scene about the vintage before she spilled it. He had lectured the sommelier. The 96 is garbage. Bring me the 82. The only year worth drinking. 1982. It was stupid. It was simple. But Arthur was a man who believed his own taste was the law of the universe. Casey's trembling finger hovered over the keypad. She pressed 1, 9, 8, 2. Beep. Chunk. The heavy steel door of the safe swung open. Casey's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached in. It wasn't full of cash. It was full of leather-bound folders. She flipped through them quickly. Tax shelters, 2020. Offshore holdings. And then she saw it. A blue folder labeled BH. Waterfront.